Welcome everyone. My name is Sanjay Sarma. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering, and it's really a great pleasure to kick off the series. As you would have seen in the email, the series is called India 2.0, and we have this wonderful handout that I think maybe many of you have. If you don't, let us know. We'll pass it on to you. Um, I've got to tell you how this all got started. Over the last few years, SP and I, occasionally talk about, what's happening around the world. And both of us, him being a BITS graduate, I'm an IIT Kanpur graduate, we often talk about India. Some of it is lament and some of it is hope, depending on the circumstances. Many things that SP predicted have come true in the last few years. You may not know this, and I may be embarrassing him a little bit, but he actually anticipated the Indian Professional League of Cricket, IPL, which is one of the most successful franchises in the world in sports today, and actually has really transformed sports economics in India. About a few months ago, we were talking separately, and by the way, he's also been a prolific writer in the Economic Times. Now, MIT is this very interesting place. We get folks coming through. Nandan Nilekani was here recently. Just passing through MIT, we had people like, we have Jairam Ramesh, who was at Harvard. He came and gave a talk. So, and as STEM and technology becomes predominant in the world, MIT's place as a bully pulpit, as a place to project great ideas, grand ideas, goes from one of prominence to one of necessity. In other words, I think it is our duty at some level to take a more important, more decisive role in talking about issues and making statements about where the world ought to go. There's no shortage of that. So a few months ago, SP and I were talking about a series of articles he's written in the Economic Times. And then more specifically, he had this really wonderful set of recommendations about for what India ought to do, especially with the new government. A time of change is a good opportunity. And I looked at them and I thought, my God, these are really great, and we should have an MIT-wide discussion about this. And over time, perhaps a discussion with the nation, with India, with America, and with the press there, with thought leaders there. And this is the kickoff of that bigger movement. And we called it India 2.0, also because the O, because of Mala's great design skills, has a wheel of dharma in it. So it is my great pleasure today to introduce SP. SP is well known to many of you. He's the deputy dean at Sloan, and he's the Gordon Billard Professor of Accounting and Finance. Before that, he was department head of accounting. In between, and actually SP's resume is so studded with accomplishments that I have to actually I really need notes for this. In between, he was the head of equity research at Barclays Global Investors. And then in between, he's also been a consultant for ENY, KPMG. He's worked with the Australian government. He has an honorary PhD from the Sydney University of Technology. Is that right, SP? Did I say that right?
University of Technology, Sydney, yep.
Mm-hmm. And the final comment I'll make is that there's also an interesting coincidence here. I'm a product of IIT Kanpur. We have in our audience someone who helped create IIT Kanpur, who'll be going there for the which anniversary is that? 50th anniversary coming up. So, and SP is a product of BITS Pilani, both of whom, both institutions owe their existence in some part at least to MIT. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce SP Kothari to kick off the series and talk about ideas for India. SP.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you. I should hire him as a publicist. What a great introduction. Thank you. It has been quite a privilege. When I went in 1974 to BITS Pilani, one of the most important reasons was my dad and others. They said, "Gee, it's MIT that has set up that institution. Something good will rub off. Go there." So I'm always grateful for what MIT has done. thank you for giving me an opportunity to share some ideas. These are some of thoughts over the years. Naturally, having born and brought up in India and then migrated here, nonetheless, there is some passion for India. And as an economist, there always is, whether it is requested or not, they feel that it is their privilege and right to offer some advice. And in that tradition, so let me say, what should India do to accelerate economic growth? Much of the discussion these days is about how high the growth rate already is. So in that sense, this kind of accelerate that further. I mean, what kind of how greedy can you get? That's the thought that comes to mind. But I want to set the stage as to why it is important to think in terms of accelerating the growth beyond where it currently is, and what's the rationale for that, why we should think along those lines, and also to say that, is it plausible? Because what's the point? Of course, higher growth would be better than lower growth, but is it plausible? And what I want to do is to lay out a set of scenarios or policy recommendations that, at the end of which, at least you will think that, it does seem plausible, that higher growth rate. So with that in mind, let us, what's a top 10 list that I might come up with? But before I come up with the top 10 list, what I want to talk about is setting the stage as to why there is a need for thinking somewhat differently beyond where the current administration, which I admire, and it has been doing well in terms of it certainly has been a welcome change compared to what happened over the previous decade. So with that in mind, I still think that it's not a set of game-changing policies that the current administration has come up with. And when you read the financial press, you will find that sometimes there are very complimentary articles, and sometimes, they are falling short of our expectations. The euphoria seems to have been subsiding. So there is at least some mixed feelings about the new administration, and the emphasis seems like better governance. That is one of the mantras, and certainly who will argue with that? Better governance is better than bad governance, so that certainly would agree with that. But will that make all the difference? And the second is tweaking of some fiscal policy. Will that produce the kind of growth that is needed to make the lives of the common man, if you will, better in India? So where is that? Very often what happens is people talk in terms of the size of the economy, and that's very misleading. Size of New Zealand is pretty small, the economy, but people are quite happy. They are very prosperous. They are, okay. So in that sense, what matters is per capita. So in that landscape, if you look at where the per capita, India is currently about $1,500 per capita. How does that compare? China is about 6,000, Mexico about 10,000, Korea is about 22, and the US about 52. So there's a huge range. Okay? So India is only 3% of the US. Now people will say, gee, purchasing power parity. And if you do that, well, maybe you will get to 3,000 or 4,000. And still, that is a far cry from where say, South Korea is, or where even Mexico is. Okay? So now, of course, going from 3,000 to 20 or 30,000, that is much farther into the future. So let us have some medium-term objective. If that is a stretch target, I would say, is to grow from 1,500 to 5,000. That is about a little more than tripling of the per capita income. That will require 10 years sustained growth of about 13 or 14%. Okay? And when people talk about GDP, one of the things that is often not understood is that you have to net out the population growth to get per capita. So if you say that, well, it grows at 8% and population growth is 1.5%, per capita will grow at 6.5%. So that's good, but the point is it's not 8%, and when you compound it, that extra 1 or 1.5% makes a huge difference, especially if you're talking about 3, 4, 5, or 6% growth rate and you lop off 1%. So that's the sense in which You need 13 or 14%. And what is needed? What is needed? So here is my set of recommendations, if you will. Okay. First, something that doesn't get talked about nearly as much, it's almost like radioactive to talk about population growth. But I think it is important to work on population growth. So what's happening? Right now, there are about 16 or 17 million people added to the population each year. That's a staggering number. If you take the entire IT sector in India, that doesn't have 16 million jobs, okay? So, and that is the population that is being, of course, there is multiplier effect and all those things you add, but still, it gives you, puts things in perspective as to how big the challenge is. That you have to think about creating opportunities for as many as 16 and 17 million people additional on top of the almost 1.3 billion population. So what is needed, in my opinion, is to target economically underprivileged parents. See, you have to help them, give them a financial incentive to both get educated and have a smaller family. Okay? And that's what. Coercion is not an option. That's not what. I would never advocate that. That's not what it is. But if we can think in terms of we offer some incentive that, especially to women in India, given limited resources, you have to make some choices. So, ideally it should be given to both boys and girls, but you start with boys and girls and offer financial incentive, but the incentive has to go to parents, because in kids' education, parents have to be interested. They have. It's not like poor parents, they might be interested, but they may not have the time or they may not have the knowledge to educate. And therefore, you are trying to provide a financial incentive so that at least if they don't have the time, now the financial incentive will make it possible for them to devote some resources and take an active interest in their children. Okay. Now, this problem, by the way, it might come across as, oh my God, somehow Indian parents are bad. No, this is a worldwide phenomenon. You just go across the river and you have the same problem in inner cities in the US that you witness over there. So this cuts across. The economically disadvantaged is the common denominator. Otherwise, it cuts across all colors, races, everything, all populations. That's on average. There are always exceptions to the rule. Mr. Modi, we know he was son of a chaiwala and very poor upbringing, all those things. But those are exceptions. On average, this is true. So if we offer a financial incentive to parents, then you can make that money, that investment to work for the good. That the payments continue so long as the child is in school. Okay, you provide that. And you continue making payments even if the woman goes to college, right? And the conditions you might attach is that, well, you will continue to receive so long as you have up to 2 kids. If you choose to have more, that is the part where there is no coercion, your choice, then the payment will continue so long as you have few children, you are educated. So the idea is to promote attributes, promote education as well as family planning without coercion, but use financial incentives. So that is this, in my opinion, this would be the best investment the government can do. You have to hold people somewhat accountable. You have to show compassion, because it has to be targeted to economically disadvantaged. At the same time, you have to hold people somewhat accountable so that it doesn't become an entitlement, it doesn't become a right in the sense of they getting money for not altering behavior. So I'm going to take questions at the end if you don't mind, right? So, okay.
We'll have a quick Q&A at the end.
Yeah. Second is foreign direct investment. India has had a love-hate relationship with foreign direct investment. Mostly hate, I think, and occasional love. So, and then regardless of whatever people say, the word that gets used is, oh, we have streamlined the investment policies or regulation. And I say that, well, first of all, recognize that foreign direct investment is needed. Because if you want to grow, you can grow either by enhancing productivity or by investing more. But when you have only $1,500 per capita, how much can you invest? Right? Yes, 20%, 25%, but that is still on a per capita basis, a couple $100 of investment. So you need, if you want to add some more growth, then you need some additional investment. If you look at all the countries that have grown over the last 5-6 decades, most of them have had enormous amount of foreign direct investment. Mexico has had more foreign direct investment with 10% of India's population. It has had more foreign direct investment than India has had in total dollar amounts, absolute, for 10% population. So on a per capita basis, it has had more than 10 times foreign direct investment. China, latest number, it has been $130 billion of foreign direct investment in China in 1 year compared to India's about $25 billion. So that also you see. And this 25 billion is a relatively high number for India. So if you, what India needs is something in the order of $200 billion. On a per capita basis, still it will come down to only $165. So in that sense, 200 billion might seem like a huge amount, but if you think in terms of this kind of investment, if it has to make a difference in the lives of an individual, then you have to think about how much investment was made for that particular individual, and that answer is $165 on an annual basis. So translated in a per capita basis, the number doesn't strike as gigantic. It seems something that is needed. The real challenge is attracting $200 billion, you have to completely make yourself, you have to transform yourself into, make it an attractive destination for people to invest. People are savvy. When within India also, you look at it, what happened with the Tata Motors? From West Bengal, the investment went to Gujarat. Okay. Why? Because Gujarat said, look, we are a better place to invest. Gujarat didn't feel ashamed of saying that we are a better place to invest and call up Tatas. Okay. In an international setting, that's what you have to do. You have to demonstrate to the rest of the world, to the investors, that it is an attractive place to invest. Okay. It is not West Bengal, but it is Gujarat, that type of, and every state will have to do that. Okay. So foreign direct investment is critically needed. Without that, it will be impossible to achieve the kind of growth that is needed. Organic growth, it's not going to happen to produce the kinds of numbers that, if you want to go from 1,500 to 5,000. Okay. Empower people, decentralize. Seems so natural. I will give you the example. I live in Lexington. This is quite familiar to us. What does Lexington have? It has its own schools. It sets its own school agenda, right? You know, its curriculum is designed. Its own police force, there is own taxes, right? So when we say that no taxation without representation, that's what it has gone down to the town and county level and city level and state level, right? In contrast, India, compared to the average population of a US state, which is about 6 million, the average population in India is about 50 million people. It's too large. In the US, there are tremendous amount of proposals to split states like California and New York because people think that they're too big, and therefore people's voice is not heard in the capitals of those states. In India, UP is 200 million people. It's very difficult for the chief minister of UP to be representing 200 million people and thinking about that. That local voice is simply not heard. And it's not just about giving people their voice for the sake of giving voice, but as we always say, knowledge should guide who should be making decisions. If there is a lot of local knowledge, then unless you give them decision rights, you are not really making decisions on the basis of knowledge, you are making decisions on the basis of some central authority, and that's not as productive. So you have to decentralize and empower people in a big way. So one first step would be to form something like 100 states in India, and so that you would have far smaller states and there would be a local voice that would be heard to a much greater extent than currently. Privatizing the public sector, this is a big issue. How many times we have heard the same story by successive governments that they want to privatize the public sector. Okay. But the Air India is still public, the railways are still, the post office, so many banks, large number of banks, coal companies, steel companies, Bharat Heavy Electricals, you go on and on, more than 50%. So many of the oil companies, they are all owned and operated by the government. Horrible administration. Okay. There are people here that, if we think about president of MIT, Raphael, well, he joined in 1980. There is year in and year out, he was an academic and then became president, right? There you go. There would be some IAS bureaucrat who was something, has gone through 10 different industries and then becomes Air India head or railways. How? I mean, is the rest of the world getting it all wrong that they have people who are CEOs who have been in the same industry for decades and then become CEOs, whereas you think you can do it without that kind of industry-specific knowledge and having grown within that industry? So there is something quite wrong from the standpoint of efficiency. So the question is, how do you privatize? It's easy to say that privatize it, right? And thought long and hard about it. The biggest obstacle to privatization is employees don't want it, which is understandable. I don't blame them, right? We always say that act in self-interest. So there's nothing wrong in they saying that we don't want to privatize because that will take away the job security, the pension, or whatever that comes with that employment. So they resist that. So what my thinking or proposal is, why don't we give ownership to those employees? Okay? So that at least make it more difficult for them to resist privatization, right? Now, if we are saying that just take it, then they would not have as much of a moral standing to say that no, this is bad. Okay? Then the only condition that I would put is that make the company private, but stock is publicly traded, and allow for market for corporate control. They work hard, the employees, they own it, they work hard, they do well, the stock price appreciates immensely, they profit, more power to that. Okay? More power to that. If they don't work hard, they don't want to, then the stock price might fall, or someone might come and say that I can operate it more efficiently, and that's what the role of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, is. That's what the role of corporate control market is. So that's the sense in which that if you have some competition, if you have a publicly traded stock, and if you have a market for corporate control, these things can function quite well. They have functioned very beautifully in the rest of the world. There is no reason why half a dozen private oil companies in India wouldn't do well when in so many other parts of the world that kind of phenomenon has worked well. Okay? So same is true of academic institutions, or many other places that can be thought about how to privatize without necessarily antagonizing the organized employee sector or unions or the organized employees, without antagonizing them too much, at least softening their resistance. It's not going to eliminate it, but it can soften it, and that might be a way to do it. Okay, laws are meant to be enforced. One of the, one routine complaint that you hear from business executives abroad is that the law enforcement situation is horrible. There might be very wonderful laws. Don't steal and these kinds of, the basic laws are pretty standard all over the world, in fact. Okay. It's the enforcement, it's the implementation. Now, India's problem, these are well known. And this is, I'm not telling anything new in that. But what is needed is to recognize that this is a serious impediment and make substantial investment in that. They are not overnight going to become totally saints and no corruption, no. But still, it would have a positive effect. Just making 100 states, you will have 100 high courts as opposed to only 25 high courts. That itself will make a big difference. So progressively, having a much bigger law enforcement, both in terms of the judiciary side as well as the law enforcement in the sense of police force or whatever, that will make a difference. It will also give confidence to people who are investing, people who are willing to engage in businesses, that India is a better place to do business.